the BTL Global Headquarters in New York, it's BTL Live. YouTube's only live streaming podcast discussing the soccer card hobby. Join the interactive program as we discuss the state of the soccer card market, individual player trends, recent sales, and more. Get your questions ready as BTL and his guests discuss the hottest topics and industry trends and keep you up to speed with all that's happening in the soccer card community. Don't forget to join their Discord server at bit.ly/BTL Discord. And now your host, Breaking the Law.
All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome. I hope you enjoyed our brand new introduction. Woo, that was intense. Welcome to BTL Live. I am Breaking the Law. We are here tonight to talk about Uncut Gems, the deep data dive on gem rates for all 22-23 soccer sets. Before we get started with that, make sure you give us a follow on Instagram and like and follow our YouTube page for all future videos. If you're not already in our soccer card Discord, the link to join is right below. Please do that. So along the way, we'll take any comments and questions you have as well, or interesting thoughts about tonight's topic. So feel free to leave those on YouTube if you're watching us live or on replay, and we will incorporate those comments into the show tonight. So let's get into it though. What is the data? Where are we at in terms of 2022, 2023 sets, and what are the sets that are gemming at the highest rate? We're going to start with a review of PSA, and we're going to look at some of the more, I won't say popular sets, but kind of the front runner sets that you think about, talk about, and seen breaking all the time if you're into breaks. Starting off with Donruss, I think that was the first release of the year, first major release of the year, 2022-2023 Donruss, right on the heels of the conclusion of the World Cup. Was a very fun set that mixed club and country, something I think we've only seen in that set this year, maybe a few other sets along the way. So far we've had over 6,000 total cards graded from Donruss, which makes sense. We've had about 10 months since the time of release. And where we're at is it is gemming just over half the time. And that seems to be about what you'd expect from a set, not quite of the quality in terms of card stock and print as a Topps Chrome, but certainly better than a paper or thicker than a paper type product. So 51% rate. And you would think that's great, the Donruss. You would think that's great, so let's keep going and see how that stacks up against some other popular sets. I included Chronicles here. I was a little shocked that only 209 Chronicles cards have been graded through PSA when I pulled this data off last week. You're talking about 27, 28% gem rate. Chronicles is a tough product to judge, though, because you have some thin paper cards and then some thick boys all the way up to patches and autos. Topps Chrome, certainly kind of the marquee product every year that we judge the hobby by. This year, Topps Chrome introduced the very fun dual and triple autos, which they've carried into a few other sets that made it particularly tasty in terms of chasing some great autos. I know I have a couple of the dual autos from Chrome that I really like. I've got some of them on the way to PSA right now, and we can expect those to gem at about a 52% rate. So you got about 1,200 total graded as of last week, about 654 gemming at a 52% rate, 53% rate. That's okay. You'd love to see a little higher, but I think gone are the days of the 65% Topps Stadium Club 2020, 2021, the Jude Bellingham rookie year. 60%, 50% seems to be, the quality control that these companies are aiming for with their heavy print run type products. A good early trend that I wanted to point out, if you look at Topps Sapphire, which is relatively new, and certainly the backlog at PSA, which things seem to have slowed down substantially since after the National in July. That's not bad. Like 60% on Sapphire I think we'd take that if we could keep that going forward. That'll be something to watch going forward, certainly, especially because you can take Messi, Ronaldo, some of the big rookies, base sapphire, grade them and turn them into a nice little profit if you were in breaks or have a high quantity of those cards. Stadium Club, probably my favorite set of the year. Still very early days, but it's gemming at a 61% rate. So we'll see how that continues and we'll probably revisit this, I think, around Christmas time to see kind of where we're at for a year-end recap would be my hope. But if we could hold the line at that 61% for Stadium Club, that would be excellent. Now, the bad news, right? Now we're getting into a little bit of the bad news here. Merlin, and you'll see this also when we look at the case hits later, Merlin has not fared well this year. The quality was bad last year in terms of the centering. We seem to be suffering from the same issues again in terms of quality control on Topps Merlin, which is so unfortunate because it is one of my favorite sets. It's the one set that'll incorporate some of the teams that you don't see in the Topps Chrome product. Merlin, only 95 graded and 38 have graded at a PSA 10, giving us a 40% gem rate, less than the 50% kind of benchmark that we'd like to see for these cards. At the end of the show, we're going to compare PSA 10 rates to SGC 10 rates, and then the picture gets even bleaker for Merlin. Let's talk about some of the products that are across the different leagues. So moving kind of away from some of the Topps and Panini, international products and looking at league-specific products. The EPL has 3. We'll start with Prism and Revolution. EPL Prism, probably the flagship Panini product. Certainly across other sports, that's the case. And here, EPL Prism. Now, you'll see Prism in a few different subsets, right? So you've got the main hobby Prism, and then we get into some choice, which is where we get some of the animal prints, and then H2 and breakaway. But 2,845 total graded, and then PSA 10s, you got 1,195 for a 42% gem rate. So not great. EPL Prism kind of carrying along with where we saw the Merlin in the low 40s, which we don't love. And we've had so many of these graded now that it seems that's where they'll probably stick in that 40 percentile range. Ryan says, my tag grades just popped. Oh, put them in there. We'll talk about that at the end. I'll bring those comments in at the end too. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. I can bring some comments on screen and chat about them. EPL Revolution, fun set. I love ripping a little Revolution. The problem is you can never tell what the parallel is. So because they're not colored and you kind of have to memorize the pattern, they're not as popular in the U.S. as they are overseas. But gemming at a 61% rate. So if you're looking to gem some autos or buy some stuff raw to grade, which I think this kind of guide would be helpful for if you're into that, EPL Revolution looks like a great bet at 61% gem rate. Moving into what many people called the set of the year, the various issues from Select. And even as recently as last week, we're getting new subsets from this issue where we've got some T-Mall coming out of FIFA and EPL. Well, let's start with Select FIFA, which I think was probably the best of these releases because it encompassed all of the major players across their national team kit. You got 741 PSA 10s across 1,400 total grades, over that 50% benchmark that we like to see on the Select, especially because you do have, this is going to include Select swatches and relics where, a thicker card, you have a harder shot at a 10 on a thicker card. So we like the 52, 53% for Select FIFA. Select La Liga, less than half of that graded, which makes sense. There was a far fewer print run on that product, coming in at about 46%, which the same can be true for Serie A and Select EPL. Now, Select EPL, in terms of grading, you've got more Select EPL has been graded than all 3 other Select products combined at this point. And then that's coming in at a 46%. So those are all still well below that 50% benchmark. I don't know that moves the needle a lot in terms of people wanting those cards. It certainly may drive up the PSA 10 value on some of those cards. And some of those gold sell it at gold to 10 sell at just absolutely crazy amounts. Oh, so our friend Ryan has dropped his tag grades in. So I'm going to bring that comment in at the tail end so we could talk about some of the conversions you made, crossovers you made. All right, let's do some of the thicker cards and then some of the tops on demand stuff. So thick boys, iMac, Impeccable, Obsidian, Museum Collection, Inception. All under 100 graded, so this is a small sample size, but we don't know what will happen in terms of how many more of these will be graded. With a thicker card, more difficult to gem because just more surface area for them to look at and find a blemish, particularly on the edges and corners. And so you'll see that reflected in these terrible pop rates, terrible gem rates. But I think the lesson here is if you can get a 10 or even a 9 in one of these cards, you're doing well relative to the rest of the graded population in that set. Immaculate's at 9%, Impeccable's at 9.5%, Obsidian's at 20%, and Museum's at 10%. And only 30 Museum cards graded and 21 Impeccable cards graded. So super low in terms of data sets to pull from. Looking at Inception, which is interesting, and probably my favorite of these, you've got a 55.6%, Inception's slightly thicker card, 55.6% gem rate, which seems great. So, I would think, like looking at the thick boys, if I could sub some Inception and pull some PSA 10s, that'd be excellent. Even the not the base, but the ones that are numbered to like 135 or in the 100s. Topps Paper, that flagship UCC set that came out before Chrome, gemming at a 57% rate. So that did incredibly well. If you're looking to buy certainly some cheap singles, because those singles go relatively inexpensively for the most part, and have them gem, that seems like a great opportunity. Now compare that to Merlin 98, which was one of these tops on demand sets that just performed terribly. I could speak from personal experience. I graded a lot of Merlin 98. And this seems about right. 10.92% gem, 10 rates. I got a lot of 8s. I got some 7s, mostly 8s on this. So the quality control on that tops on demand stuff is not good. We see that again with the Deco product. 342 out of 955 for a 35% gem rate. So just poor quality control on the tops on demand stuff. All right, let's look at some SGC 10 stuff real quick. We all know that our friend Brian doesn't like SGC. Says SGC is less than HSA, but HGA, but here we go. Nevertheless, gem rates, 39% for Chrome, and we're going to compare PSA in a minute. 39% for Chrome, 50% Stadium Club, 25 and 26 for Merlin and EPL, and then 39% for Select FIFA. So let's view these side by side and see just how much more stringent SGC is with their grades than PSA. If you're looking at the Don Russ, you're talking 51% gem rate for PSA versus 35 for SGC, and that trend continues. Substantially easier to gem a card at PSA across all of the major sets compared to SGC. Now, certainly then, keeping in mind the fact that, I think someone subs SGC. I sub to SGC for a few reasons. One, for stuff that's in the PC, it's cheaper. And I happen to like the appearance of the slab, but not everybody does. And it's certainly quicker. I did a 50-card submission 2 weeks ago to SGC. I got the cards back last week. 2 weeks before that, I sent a sub to PSA. It's still in pre-grading. So you can't beat the timing. And you certainly can't beat the timing. And then I think Brian makes a fair point. Pop count's not the same, and it's about the money. It's certainly SGC has its place, I think, in the hobby, and they have far better customer service, I would say, than PSA's customer service, which is essentially non-existent, in my opinion. The resale value on a PSA 10, substantially higher than on an SGC 10. Now, we could get into some arguments, depending on the buyer. Certainly, Brian C. is going to be excluded from this argument. the relative value of an SGC 9.5 versus a PSA 9 is an interesting debate to have. A lot of it's going to depend on the card and the demand for the card and the liquidity of the card. But I think there's an argument to be made that depending on how long PSA is taking with these bulk subs going forward, things were great. Like if you rewind pre-summer or early summer, pre-national, you could get a sub back in 30 to 45 days from PSA, which is great. If you get the stuff in right away from a break or you're ripping on your own and you sub it to PSA and it comes back, while those cards are still relevant in the market and you're going to sell them, certainly that makes a lot of sense and made a lot of sense. It's slowed down substantially. I think we'll all agree it's slowed down substantially here since the National, even really before the National. And there's no, from a cost benefit perspective, I think it also depends on your intention with the cards. If you're going to immediately flip them and it's a hot new product, there's some value to having them back within a week or two so you can liquidate them versus, if I subbed, my last sub was like a lot of Topps Chrome, I think, and my early Stadium Club hits. I mean, we're now 2 or 3 products down the line from that. And not to say they won't sell in a PSA 10, but certainly that PSA 10 4X multiplier is no longer the standard. It used to be 4X raw gets you the PSA 10 price. And I found, anecdotally at least, that's not necessarily the case. Closer to 3X multiplier if you are lucky on the card. And timing does matter. How many? I'm gonna save that question, Brian. That is a good question. I'm gonna come back to that. All right, so let's talk about case hits because I thought this was interesting. Shifting gears back to PSA for a minute. All right, so going through the case hits, I thought this would be kind of an interesting little thing, especially if you're someone who's going to be buying case hits raw to try to grade. What does that look like? So Kaboom, which was out of Donruss 22-23, did excellent. 71% gem rate compared to a 51% gem rate in the regular Donruss base product. So Kaboom, I would say great investment if you're hoping to gem that card. Could I look at a Kaboom and tell you if it's going to 10 or not? I could look at the corners. The surface is crazy to look at. So, unless you got one of the microscopes like we have, or you're very experienced or have a super keen eye, or it's an obvious scratch or print line, the Kaboom, great gem rate though. I mean, almost 3 out of 4 hitting the 10. Color blasts are fun. So you've got Obsidian Color Blast, which are the black, and then the Prism White Color Blast, which you didn't see very many of, but you've seen a lot more grade. And that's probably just a byproduct of timing on the release of the product. Obsidian's much newer. The Obsidian Black Color Blast gemming at 37%, far better than base Obsidian, which was at 20%. So better there. And I think this will be something to be revisited in December when we look at these numbers again. Prism Color Blast, 61% gem. Again, far better than the 42% gem rate on the Prism base set. So the question is, do they look at these cards differently because they know that they're case hits at PSA? Certainly the layout of the card is different, right? Color Blasts and Kabooms look remarkably different than their base competition within that set. But they're all three of these gemming at a far greater rate than their base counterparts, or than the base set itself. The Select Stainer, same thing's true here. 61% gemming compared to regular Select cards, 47%. So you get your hands on a Stainer, gemming at a great rate, 61%. Now Renaissance, horse of a different color, and this is part of the problem we're going to come back to, Topps Merlin. A very small sample size, yes, but 36% gemming compared to a 40% gem rate in the Merlin set. They're both bad. The other competing problem with Renaissance is that they're in blasters, right? Topps includes those case hits in their retail product. So you're going to see far lower gem rates in Merlin anyways than you want. And the fact that there's so many of these Renaissance, I mean, it might put a premium on a PSA 10, but the values of these raw have gone down dramatically. The colored parallels do well, but this is not something I'd be buying to grade. And then one thing I threw in that I don't know what you can tell about this because these are from multiple different sets, but that the Grail, the Erling Haaland Grail card, gemmed at a 65% rate, which I thought was fun. Let's get to some comments. So I want to go back to, let's see. Where do we want to go back to? Let's start with Ryan's interesting crossover. I'm going to walk you through what he did. So he took a bunch of cards that he had graded, cracked them, and subbed them to tag, which we have not included in this conversation. But certainly a lot of people like the tag product, and it is a beautiful slab. And you get, this is the AI, one of the AI grading companies. So they're grading using machine technology. And you can scan the QR code and get all kinds of data points on this card. More data than you'd ever want. He took an SGC 10, cracked it, subbed it to tag 10. Pretty good. Took an SGC 10, cracked it, turned it into a tag 9. This one's interesting. Took an SGC 9.5, cracked it, turned it into a tag 7.5. And then PSA 10 to tag 10. So all pretty consistent except a few blemishes on this SGC grading, or two of the three at least. How many SGC submissions slabs do you own versus PSA? I'd say in the PC it's pretty even. Now I probably have about 150 PSA and about 75 SGC outside of the PC. Let's see, what's Matt say? Interesting to look at when you compare the values. People refuse to change when it comes to PSA just because of value. Yeah, I mean, this is for sure true. For sure true. Why is it true is a whole separate conversation. You know, we know the hobby is slow to change. Certainly tag is trying to change that. There's not enough of the pop. There's not enough pop count or data behind the tag grading yet to differentiate or see where that's going to move the product values. People are resistant to change. I mean, I would challenge anyone to tell me that they think that the PSA slab looks good. Like it looks like it was typed on a typewriter. So, it can't be the aesthetic quality. It's just that this is the way it's always been done, and this is what I'm comfortable with, and that's fine. But I just don't. I don't necessarily agree with it. When I'm buying, I don't place value the same way. But as a seller, you've really got to factor this in for sure. You want the report. It's like buying a diamond. You want the report. I mean, for tag, yeah, that's the upshot, is that it's going to give you that. If you're someone who wants a pristine card and you want to know any and all deficiencies with that card, then the tag grading system would be interesting. It just doesn't have enough volume behind it at this point. Look at the way that they do their submissions. You got to buy into the drop and you only get a certain number of cards. There's not going to be enough volume, especially in the soccer market, which is a small niche part of the overall card market, to generate any meaningful data or conclusions from it. Yeah, they look nice, and it's nice to have that level of like ranking of the card, but so many of the cards are pop one of one that it's just tough to say, what's the long-term impact, but I think it is something to follow for sure. I couldn't get the BGS. One other kind of point, couldn't get the BGS pop reports. I was not going to do battle with BGS to extrapolate that data. It does take the human error out. So by using tag, and I'm all for AI, you get rid of like getting a bad grader or someone who's had a bad day or someone who's rushing through something or doesn't know what they're doing, to have a consistently graded product. Totally for it. I don't know that the slabs look fine too. So from an aesthetic perspective, it's fine. I don't necessarily love the small font and the fact that I can see clear through the label. I think it makes it difficult to read, but some people like that. it's certainly interesting to have the AI versus human error component being talked about. Do these companies put out what their exact grading guidelines are? Even with automation, it still depends on the criteria. I think most of them do if you dig. I know specifically SGC is pretty transparent in terms of from centering what can qualify as a 10, what are some of the rubrics and guidelines they look for in a 10 versus a 9.5 and so on down. And I know this is a big deal, particularly in the vintage baseball market where SGC is much more prominent and popular among collectors. So I think PSA, you can also find it. I don't think it's tremendously detailed like you'd expect, but certainly, and that's a good point about tag as well. It still depends on what the criteria are. It depends on what you're telling that computer to look at, because at some level, some human has programmed in what they want the AI to be doing, right? I did not see the report you sent me about the tag grade. PSA valued much higher, and I feel like SGC is not consistent with their grade. So this is a good point. You got two separate points here, really, Nikad's making. I think we all agree PSA is valued higher, especially on a 10 versus 10 basis to SGC. Not close, right? Probably 2x PSA 10 versus SGC 10. I still question, and this would be interesting maybe as a separate show topic, or if you wanted to look on your own, the value of an SGC 9.5 versus the value of a PSA 9 and what that does. Because I bet they're pretty close. And then SGC not being consistent with their grade. This I could see. This I could definitely see. They're moving so much more quickly than PSA through the process. And they're not grading as many cards, but they definitely don't have as much staff either. And they're turning things around so quickly. And that doesn't mean that PSA is looking at your cards more than SGC is. Certainly, that doesn't necessarily have to be true. Their process is just much quicker, and they're grading a far smaller volume of cards. But I have noticed some inconsistencies with SGC. Yeah, I would say that is true. But we've also seen that they're much more reluctant to give 10s as a percentage compared to PSA, at least in this year's soccer card set. We'll revisit this show. I'm going to revisit the data at the end of the year. And I think what may be interesting to do then is to take a historic look at like Prism across a few years, Topps Chrome across a few years. Like what is Stadium Club across a few years? Like what does it look like? As the print runs have gone crazy, what has happened to the gem rates of these cards? So that's probably something I'm going to write down to include here. Happy to take any more questions, comments. I appreciate you guys joining in, certainly. Make sure if you're not already in the Discord, I know everyone that's commented here tonight is in the Discord. We are running a soccer trade night. It's going to be a Discord exclusive. We're going to call it the biggest virtual trade night in soccer history. Make sure you're in the Discord, bit.ly/BTL Discord. What a guy. What a guy. Came in, gave us a hard time about our SGC cards. Still has his manners. Thank you, sir. All right, that's going to do it for me. I will, if you missed it, Tag also takes high quality, like with a camera. Interesting. Tag takes high quality pictures that isn't a scan. Okay, I'll have to look at that. Interesting to see what that report looks like. Again, it's like, okay, if you're grading 4 cards, 10 cards, that's fine. A lot of our subs are 50, 75, 80 cards at a time. Do I want or need that amount of information on every soccer card? No, I don't. But on some cards that I'm going to keep in the PC, I think that'd be fun to have, almost like a dossier on the card, right? And we talk about like the history of a card, like where a card is sold and when it's sold, especially for bigger cards. That would be a very interesting kind of piece to put into the abstract of the card, certainly. I am going to say goodnight and sign off. I am going to play my intro music on the way out. So if you missed the intro music, don't log off now. We've got I'll play it at the end too, just so you can hear it.
Live from the BTL Global Headquarters in New York, it's BTL Live. YouTube's only live streaming podcast discussing the soccer card hobby. Join the interactive program as we discuss the state of the soccer card market, individual player trends, recent sales, and more. Get your questions ready as BTL and his guests discuss the hottest topics and industry trends and keep you up to speed with all that's happening in the soccer card community. Don't forget to join their Discord server at bit.ly/BTL Discord. And now your host, Breaking the Law.